My son screamed into the phone at 3 in the morning. Dad, Vanessa is dying. I need $45,000 right now or the surgeons will not operate. I looked at the digital clock glowing in the dark. I listened to the background noise on the line. Then I said, "Call her rich father." I hung up the phone, unplugged it from the wall, and went back to sleep. I thought I was simply teaching a spoiled man a lesson about boundaries. I did not know that phone call was just the opening move in a game that would end with federal agents raiding a multi-million-dollar empire. But the call I got 6 hours later from the police station changed everything. Before I continue this story, please let me know where you are watching from in the comments below. The red numbers on my alarm clock read 3:14 in the morning. The silence in my house was absolute, the kind of heavy quiet you only get when you live alone in a 4-bedroom colonial that has seen better days. I was 72 years old. I had spent 30 years as a forensic accountant for the FBI chasing money trails through shell companies and offshore accounts. I knew how to sleep with one eye open, but nothing prepares a father for the sound of his own son panicking. The landline on my nightstand screamed into the darkness. I picked it up before the second ring. Dad, thank God. It was Jason. His voice was pitched high, cracking at the edges. "You have to help me. Vanessa. She was in a car accident. We are at St. Jude's. It is bad, Dad. It is so bad." My heart hammered against my ribs. For a split second, I was just a father terrified for his family. I sat up, reaching for my glasses. "What happened, Jason? Is she stable?" "She is bleeding internally." He was sobbing now, loud, wet sounds that echoed in the receiver. "The insurance is denying the claim because of a lapse in the policy. They need $45,000 upfront for the emergency surgery, or they are going to stabilize her and transfer her to the county hospital. She will die on the way, Dad. You have to wire it. I need your card number right now." I paused. My hand hovered over the lamp switch. $45,000. Immediate transfer. Refusal of service without payment. The adrenaline in my system began to cool, replaced by the icy, familiar sensation of my old life. I closed my eyes and focused not on my son's words, but on the sounds behind him. I expected to hear the rhythmic beeping of heart monitors. I expected the squeak of rubber soles on linoleum, the distant PA system calling for doctors, the chaotic hum of an emergency room. Instead, I heard wind. It was a low distortion, a buffeting sound like air rushing past a microphone, and behind that, a rhythmic metallic clanking. Clank, hiss, clank. "Jason." I kept my voice flat, devoid of the panic he was trying to induce. "You are at St. Jude's Medical Center." "Yes, Dad, hurry. St. Jude's is a nonprofit trauma center. They are legally required to stabilize critical patients regardless of ability to pay. They do not demand credit card numbers over the phone while a patient is bleeding out." There was a millisecond of silence on the line. A glitch in his performance. "This is different, Dad. It is a specialist surgeon. He is out of network. He will not scrub in without a deposit. Just give me the damn number. Do you want Vanessa to die?" I looked at the empty side of my bed, where my wife used to sleep. I thought about the dinner we had last week, where Vanessa had spent 2 hours bragging about her father, Richard Sterling. She had shown off a diamond bracelet she claimed cost more than my car. She had called my house quaint and my retirement modest. "If she needs a specialist, Jason, then you should call Richard." "What?" "Call her father. Richard Sterling. The real estate tycoon. $45,000 is pocket change for a man who just closed a $1 million deal in Miami, right? Isn't that what she told us at dinner?" "Dad, don't do this. Richard is traveling. I can't reach him. You are the only one." The wind on the line got louder. The metallic clanking sound happened again, closer this time. It sounded like a tire iron hitting pavement. "You are lying, Jason." "Excuse me." The sobbing stopped, instantly replaced by a tone of cold aggression I recognized all too well. You are not in a hospital. I can hear the wind. You are outside. And St. Jude's does not have an outdoor waiting room. You old miser. If she dies, this is on you. I will sue you for everything you have. I will bury you. Good night, Jason. I hung up the phone. My hand was steady, but my chest felt hollow. I reached down and pulled the telephone cord out of the wall jack. Then I picked up my cell phone and powered it down. I laid back in the dark. I knew I should be worried. I knew a normal father would be pacing the floor wondering if he had just condemned his daughter-in-law to death. But I wasn't a normal father. I was a man who had spent decades looking at balance sheets and spotting the one number that didn't fit. The numbers didn't fit. Jason had been unemployed for 2 years, though he tried to hide it. Vanessa spent money she didn't have. And that background noise. That wasn't a hospital. That was the sound of a hustle. I went back to sleep. It took me an hour, but I forced myself to drift off. It was a discipline I learned years ago. Panic solves nothing. Logic solves everything. The sun was streaming through the sheer curtains when I woke up. It was 8 o'clock. The house was still. The silence of the morning felt different than the silence of the night. It felt heavy with consequence. I walked to the kitchen and started the coffee maker. The smell of dark roast filled the air, grounding me. I poured a cup black and sat at the small kitchen table. Only then did I turn my cell phone back on. It buzzed immediately. Not a text from Jason. Not a missed call from a hospital. Unknown caller. I waited. It rang again. This is Gideon Blackwood. Mr. Blackwood. This is Sergeant Kowalski from the 4th Precinct. I took a sip of coffee. The liquid was scalding hot. I didn't flinch. Is this about my son, Jason? Yes, sir. We have him in custody. Is he hurt? No, sir. He is physically fine. And his wife, Vanessa. Is she at St. Jude's? There was a pause on the line, a shuffling of papers. No, sir. She is in the cell next to him. She is fine, too. A bit dirty, but uninjured. I felt a knot loosen in my stomach, a knot I hadn't admitted was there. They were alive. They were safe. And I was right. What are the charges, Sergeant? Grand larceny, attempted insurance fraud, and destruction of private property. I closed my eyes. Destruction of property, Mr. Blackwood. We need you to come down here. It concerns your vehicle, the 1968 Mercedes. I set the coffee cup down. My hand trembled just once. That car was the only thing I had left of my glory days. I had restored it bolt by bolt. I had let Jason borrow it yesterday because he said he had a job interview and wanted to look professional. I will be there in 20 minutes. I drove to the station in my beat-up Ford truck. My mind was racing, analyzing the data points. The call at 3 a.m., the demand for cash, the arrest. When I walked into the precinct, the air smelled of stale floor wax and old sweat. Sergeant Kowalski met me at the desk. He was a big man, tired eyes looking at me with a mixture of pity and respect. Mr. Blackwood, thank you for coming. Where are they? Processing. You can see them in a moment. But first you need to see the report. He slid a clipboard across the counter. I put on my reading glasses. I read the officer's notes. My eyes scanned the text with the speed of a man used to reading federal indictments. Suspects apprehended at Miller's scrapyard at 400 hours. Suspects were in the process of removing the catalytic converter airbags and vintage dashboard components from a 1968 Mercedes-Benz. Vehicle had been positioned near a concrete barrier to simulate a high-speed collision. No injuries reported. Suspects claimed vehicle brake failure. I looked up. They were stripping it. Yes, sir. It looks like they plan to sell the parts on the black market, then crash the chassis into a wall to claim the total loss payout from your insurance. They tried to stage the scene, but a patrol car saw the flashlights in the scrapyard. The 3 a.m. call. It wasn't just a hustle. It was a diversion. They wanted the cash from me and the cash from the car. They were trying to double dip on a crime that hadn't even happened yet. Can I see them? Kowalski nodded. Follow me. He led me through a heavy steel door into the holding area. There were 2 cells facing each other. Jason was sitting on a metal bench, his head in his hands. He was wearing the suit he had borrowed for his interview, but the sleeves were stained with black grease. His tie was undone, hanging around his neck like a noose. Vanessa was in the opposite cell. She was pacing. Her designer jeans were ruined, smeared with oil and dirt. Her hair, usually perfectly styled, was a matted mess. When she saw me, she threw herself against the bars. Gideon, thank God. You have to get us out of here. This is a misunderstanding. It was a setup. Jason looked up. His face was pale, streaked with grime. Dad! I stood in the center of the hallway. I looked at my son, 38 years old. I remembered teaching him to ride a bike. I remembered paying for his college tuition. I remembered the day he married Vanessa, and I saw the way she looked at his wallet instead of his eyes. A setup. I asked, my voice echoing off the concrete walls. Yes, Vanessa insisted. We were carjacked. They forced us to drive to the scrapyard. They made us take the car apart. They had guns, Gideon. We barely escaped with our lives. I looked at Kowalski. The sergeant raised an eyebrow. Strange, Kowalski said. The arresting officer didn't find any gunmen. Just 2 people with a socket wrench set and a list of part prices in their pocket. We were under duress. Jason shouted, standing up. Dad, you have to believe me. Pay the bail. We will explain everything at home. Just get us out. How much is bail? I asked. $5,000 each. Kowalski answered. 10% of the bond. $10,000 total. I had that kind of money. I had significantly more than that sitting in accounts they knew nothing about. I could write a check right now, and they would be sleeping in their own beds by noon. Jason saw the hesitation in my eyes. He saw his father, the man who had always fixed everything. Please, Dad. I can't stay here. I have a job interview tomorrow. Another one. You stripped my car, Jason. You called me at 3 in the morning and told me your wife was dying. You tried to extort $45,000 from me while you were holding a wrench, destroying the one thing I loved. It wasn't like that. I turned to Vanessa. She was crying now, but there were no tears. It was a performance. I had interviewed con artists who could cry on command better than Meryl Streep. She wasn't sad. She was annoyed. Call my father, Vanessa snapped. Call Richard. He will have us out in an hour, and he will sue this department for false arrest. I smiled. It was a cold, thin smile. I told you last night, Vanessa. Call him yourself. I turned my back on them. Dad. Wait. Where are you going? Jason gripped the bars. I am going home, Jason. You are not paying the bail. No. You can't leave us here. It is 24 hours until the arraignment. I looked at Kowalski. Sergeant. I am declining to post bond. They can wait for the judge. But Dad. Jason's voice cracked. I walked back to the heavy steel door. I paused with my hand on the handle. Use the time to think, Jason. Think about the wind on the phone line. Think about the grease on your hands. And think about why you are sitting in a cage while your wife is screaming at police officers. I walked out. The heavy door slammed shut, cutting off their screams. I walked back to the front desk. My hands were shaking now, but not from fear. From rage. Cold, hard rage. Kowalski handed me a plastic bag. Personal effects recovered from the vehicle. We thought you should have them since the car is... Well, it is evidence now. I took the bag. Inside was a glove box manual, a pair of sunglasses, and a small leather notebook that belonged to Jason. Thank you, Sergeant. Mr. Blackwood. Kowalski lowered his voice. Your son, when we booked him, his credit check came back flagged. He has outstanding debts. Big ones. How big? Gambling debts. Loan sharks. That is why they were stripping the car. They were desperate. I nodded. It fit the pattern. The desperation. The erratic behavior. The lie about the surgery. Thank you. I walked out into the bright morning sun. The world looked the same as it had an hour ago, but my world had completely collapsed. My son was a criminal. My daughter-in-law was an accomplice, and I was the target. I got into my truck and threw the plastic bag on the passenger seat. The leather notebook slid out. I picked it up. I opened it. It wasn't just a diary. It was a ledger. Jason had been keeping track of his debts, but on the last page there was a list of my assets, my house, estimated value $850,000, my pension, my life insurance policy, and next to the life insurance policy in Vanessa's handwriting was a note, if he has a heart attack, payout doubles. I sat in the parking lot of the police station, and I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the air conditioning. They hadn't just wanted the car. They hadn't just wanted the cash. They were counting my assets like an inheritance they were already spending. I started the engine. I wasn't going home to cry. I was going home to work. I had been a forensic accountant for 30 years. I knew how to follow a paper trail. And if my son and his wife wanted a war, they were about to find out why the FBI used to call me the auditor. I drove toward my house, but I didn't park in the driveway. I parked down the street. I watched my own home for a moment, looking for anything out of place. Paranoia is a survival skill. I went inside and went straight to my study. I unlocked the bottom drawer of my desk and took out my old laptop. It was encrypted, secure, and disconnected from the house Wi-Fi. I logged into the credit bureau database. I still had my ways. I still had my contacts. I typed in Jason Blackwood. The screen filled with red. Defaulted loans, maxed out credit cards. But then I saw something that made me freeze. A joint account. Opened 3 months ago. Name Jason Blackwood and Richard Sterling. I stared at the screen. Richard Sterling. The billionaire real estate mogul. The man Vanessa worshipped. Why would a billionaire open a joint account with my unemployed son? I clicked on the details. The account was overdrawn, heavily. But the transaction history was strange. Deposits from shell companies, withdrawals to offshore gambling sites. And then I saw it. The address listed for Richard Sterling's business, Sterling Global Holdings. It wasn't a skyscraper in downtown. It was a P.O. box in a strip mall in Nevada. I leaned back in my chair. The pieces clicked together with the satisfying snap of a loaded gun. Richard Sterling wasn't a billionaire. He was broke. He was a fraud. And he was using my son as a bagman to move dirty money. Jason wasn't just stripping my car for pocket change. He was trying to cover a hole in a sinking ship that was about to drag my entire family to the bottom of the ocean. My phone rang. It was Richard Sterling. I looked at the ID. I let it ring 3 times. Then I answered. Gideon. His voice was smooth, cultured fake. I heard about the unfortunate misunderstanding with the police. I am on my way to your house. We need to talk. Man to man. I looked at the computer screen at the red numbers that proved he was a liar. Come over, Richard, I said. I will put the coffee on. I hung up. I didn't put the coffee on. I put a second voice recorder under the coffee table. The game had changed. They thought they were playing checkers with a senile old man. They didn't know I was playing 4D chess, and I had just seen their king was exposed. The next 24 hours were going to be the longest of their lives, and the most expensive. I sat in my leather armchair, the one facing the front window, and waited. I had placed the voice recorder carefully under the coffee table, secured with a strip of duct tape so it would not slide if someone kicked the leg. The house was quiet, but it was the silence of a trap waiting to be sprung. I checked my watch. It was a Timex, simple, reliable, and completely unpretentious, unlike the man who was currently pulling into my driveway. A silver Bentley glided to a halt in front of my house. It was a beautiful machine. Too beautiful for a Tuesday afternoon in a working-class suburb. I watched through the slats of the blinds. The car did not have a permanent license plate, just a paper temporary tag taped to the rear window. A rental. Or a lease on its last warning. Richard Sterling stepped out. I had to give him credit, the man knew how to make an entrance. He was wearing a cream-colored linen suit that probably cost more than my first car. His hair was silver and perfectly coiffed, swept back in a way that suggested he spent a lot of time looking in mirrors. He adjusted his jacket, shot his cuffs, and marched toward my front door with the air of a general inspecting the barracks of a disappointing subordinate. He didn't knock. He rang the doorbell 4 times in rapid succession. I took a sip of my coffee, counted to 10, and then slowly rose to answer it. When I opened the door, Richard was already mid-breath, ready to launch into a tirade. "Gideon, this is unconscionable." He pushed past me without an invitation, bringing a cloud of expensive cologne and nervous sweat into my hallway. I closed the door gently. "Hello, Richard. I see you got my message." "Message?" He spun around, his face flushed a deep, unhealthy red. "You call leaving my daughter and your own son rotting in a jail cell a message? This is barbarism, Gideon. Absolute barbarism. I have spoken to my legal team in New York, and we are preparing to file a suit against this police department for unlawful arrest, harassment, and emotional distress. And you," he pointed a manicured finger at my chest, "you are liable for negligence. That car of yours was a death trap. The brakes failed. They were lucky to be alive." I walked past him into the living room and sat back down in my chair. I gestured to the sofa opposite me. "Sit down, Richard. You are going to give yourself a stroke." He remained standing, trying to use his height to intimidate me. I had been interrogated by cartel accountants and mafia fixers. A man in a linen suit did not frighten me. "I will not sit. I am here to demand you fix this. I am currently liquidating some assets in the Cayman Islands to cover their bail, but the international wire transfer takes 48 hours. You know how banking regulations are. In the meantime, I expect you to write the check. You are the father. Act like one." I looked at him. Really looked at him. In my line of work, you learn to ignore what people say and watch what they do. You look for the discrepancies, the glitch in the matrix. Richard was projecting wealth. His posture was arrogant. His voice was booming, but his hands were shaking. Just a micro tremor. The kind you see in addicts or men who owe money to people who break legs. "The banking regulations are indeed strict, Richard," I said, my voice calm, "especially for offshore accounts. Which bank in the Caymans are you using?" He blinked. The question caught him off guard. He waved his hand dismissively. "That is irrelevant. The point is, my liquidity is temporarily tied up in a merger acquisition. I cannot access my operational funds until Monday." "But you. I know you have a pension, Gideon. I know you have savings. Go to the bank. Get them out." I leaned forward, resting my elbows on my knees. "You want me to bail them out? It is the least you can do after you refused to pay for Vanessa's surgery. Which, by the way, was a misunderstanding. She was confused. She was in shock from the accident." "There was no accident, Richard. There was." He insisted. They crashed into a barrier. They were found with socket wrenches removing the dashboard. People in shock do not carefully unscrew a vintage instrument panel. People in shock do not organize parts by resale value. Richard paced the room. He walked to the fireplace and looked at the framed photos on the mantel. He wasn't looking at the pictures, though. He was looking for something else. Maybe something valuable he could slip into his pocket. Maybe he was just looking for a way out. You are a cynical man, Gideon. That is your problem. You spent too long chasing ghosts for the government, and now you see criminals everywhere. Vanessa is a good girl. She has expensive tastes, yes, but she is ambitious. She has vision, just like me. I watched him pace. As he moved, his left hand came up to smooth back his hair. The sleeve of his linen jacket slid down, revealing a heavy gold watch. A Rolex Daytona. A timepiece that retails for upwards of $40,000 if you can find one. It caught the light beautifully. But then he dropped his hand and rested it on the back of my sofa right in front of my face. I focused on the watch. I had spent 6 months in '98 building a case against a counterfeit ring in New Jersey. I knew watches. The second hand on a genuine Rolex sweeps. It is a smooth, continuous motion powered by a complex mechanical movement. It glides. Richard's second hand ticked. Tick, tick, tick. It was subtle. To a layman, it looked perfect. But to me, it was screaming. It was a battery-powered quartz movement inside a gold-plated shell. It was a fake. A very good fake, but a fake nonetheless. Rich men do not wear fake watches. They might wear cheap watches if they are humble. They might wear no watch, but they never wear a counterfeit. A counterfeit is a lie you tell on your wrist. Nice watch, I said. He pulled his sleeve down, instinctively covering it. Thank you. A gift from a satisfied client. A Saudi prince, actually. I bet. I looked down. He was still standing, shifting his weight from foot to foot. I looked at his shoes. Italian loafers. Hand-stitched. At first glance, they looked immaculate. But he was standing in a beam of sunlight streaming through the window, and the light is cruel to deception. The leather near the toe was cracked. Deep spiderweb fissures that had been filled in with wax and polished over. And the heel of the right shoe was worn down at an angle, the rubber sole separating slightly from the leather upper. These were expensive shoes, yes, but they were 5 years old, maybe 10. And they hadn't been replaced because the man wearing them couldn't afford a new pair. He was literally walking on the ruins of his past success. I put the pieces together. The rental car with the temporary tag, the fake Rolex, the repaired shoes, the excuse about the Cayman Islands. Richard Sterling was broke, not just cash poor, he was destitute, he was insolvent. And that meant the $45,000 Jason had demanded wasn't for surgery. It wasn't even for Jason. It was for Richard. My son was stripping my car to pay his father-in-law's debts. I sat back in my chair. A cold clarity washed over me. So, I said, you want me to pay the $10,000 bail? It is a loan, Gideon. I will pay you back with interest on Monday. And the $45,000 Jason asked for last night. What was that for, really? Richard froze. He stopped pacing. He turned to me, and for a second the mask slipped. I saw the panic in his eyes. Raw, naked terror. That was for medical bills, like he said. I stood up. I walked over to him. I was 3 inches shorter than him, but in that moment I felt 10 feet tall. You are lying, Richard. You are lying about the bank. You are lying about the accident. And you are lying about your watch. He clutched his wrist. Excuse me. It is a quartz movement, Richard. It ticks. A Saudi prince wouldn't give you a battery-powered Rolex. He would give you the real thing, or he would have you beheaded for insulting him." Richard's face went from red to white. His mouth opened, but no sound came out. "And your shoes?" I continued looking down. "You used black kiwi polish on Cordovan leather. It doesn't match. You are trying to cover the cracks." I stepped closer into his personal space. "You don't have any money, do you? You are drowning. And you dragged my son into the water with you to use him as a flotation device." Richard took a step back. He bumped into the coffee table. I hoped the tape held on the recorder. "You are insane," he hissed. "I am worth millions. My portfolio is diverse. I have assets in real estate technology. You have a P.O. box in Nevada." I interrupted him. "I looked you up, Richard. Sterling Global Holdings. It is a shell. It has been inactive for 3 years. You have 7 judgments against you in civil court. You owe the IRS back taxes from 2018. He looked at me with pure hatred. The sophisticated businessman vanished, and in his place was a cornered rat. "You think you are so smart. You think you can just sit here in your little house and judge me. You don't know how the world works. You have to leverage. You have to maneuver. Is that what you call it?" Maneuvering. "My son is in a jail cell because of your maneuvering. He is weak." Richard spat the words out. "Jason is weak. He does whatever Vanessa tells him, and Vanessa does whatever I tell her. That is the natural order, Gideon. The strong eat the weak." He laughed. It was a dry, brittle sound. "You won't bail him out because you are cheap. I won't bail him out because I need my liquidity for bigger things. So he sits. It will toughen him up. You admit it then. You are using them. I am teaching them how to survive. If you want to be rich, Gideon, you have to be willing to do what is necessary. You have to be willing to bleed a little, or let others bleed for you." He straightened his jacket. He smoothed his hair. He regained his composure as if the outburst had never happened. "I am leaving. If you change your mind and decide to be a father, you know where to send the check. If not, I will handle it on Monday." He turned and walked to the door. He opened it, and the bright sunlight flooded the hallway. "Oh, and Gideon." He paused without looking back. "Watch your back. People who dig into my business tend to find themselves in very deep holes." He slammed the door. I walked to the window and watched him get into the silver Bentley. He took a moment to check his face in the rearview mirror before starting the engine. He drove away slowly, careful not to scratch the rental. I went back to the coffee table. I reached underneath and peeled the tape off. I pulled out the recorder. The little red light was still blinking. I pressed stop. Then I pressed play. The strong eat the weak. The audio was crisp, clear, perfect. I walked into the kitchen and poured the rest of the coffee down the sink. I didn't need caffeine anymore. My blood was boiling on its own. He thought I was weak. He thought I was just an old man with a pension and a grudge. He didn't know I was the guy the Justice Department used to call when they couldn't find the body, but they knew where the money went. I sat down at the kitchen table and pulled out my phone. I dialed a number I hadn't called in 5 years. "O'Malley," I said when the voice answered. "Gideon." The voice was raspy, sounding surprised. "I thought you were dead or golfing." "Neither. I am working. I need you to open a file." "What kind of file?" "RICO. Racketeering, fraud, and conspiracy." "Who is the target?" "Richard Sterling. And my son." There was a long silence on the line. Then O'Malley spoke. "You are going after your own kid. He isn't my kid right now, O'Malley. He is a liability, and I am going to balance the books." I hung up. I looked at the empty chair across from me. Richard Sterling had made one fatal mistake. He had come into my house and insulted my intelligence. He had worn a fake watch to a gunfight. Now I was going to show him what real time looked like. 20 to life. The key to the third bedroom was heavy in my pocket. It was a brass skeleton key, old and tarnished, just like the man carrying it. I stood in the hallway for a moment, listening to the silence of the house. The confrontation with Richard had left a metallic taste in my mouth, the taste of adrenaline that hadn't fully metabolized. I walked to the end of the hall, past the photos of Jason's high school graduation and the framed needlepoint my wife had made 3 months before she died. I stopped at the door that had remained locked for 5 years. I inserted the key. The tumblers clicked with a heavy, satisfying thud. I pushed the door open. The air inside was stale dry and smelled of ozone and dust. The blinds were drawn tight, sealing the room in a permanent twilight. I flipped the switch on the wall. The overhead light flickered once and buzzed to life, revealing a room that looked more like a bunker than a home office. There were filing cabinets lining the walls, steel gray and fireproof. In the center of the room sat a massive mahogany desk, completely clear of clutter except for a single coaster and a computer tower that looked outdated to the untrained eye, but was actually a custom-built fortress of encryption. I walked over to the desk and ran my finger across the surface. A thick layer of gray dust coated the wood. I wiped it on my pants. I sat down in the ergonomic chair, and the leather creaked under my weight, a familiar sound that triggered muscle memory from decades of late nights and cold coffee. I pressed the power button. The machine hummed to life. The fans whirred, blowing a puff of dust into the air. I waited for the boot sequence. It was a Linux system, stripped down, secure, no bloatware, no tracking cookies, just pure processing power. I typed in my password. It was 24 characters long, a random alphanumeric string I had memorized in 1999 and never written down. Access granted. I wasn't just checking bank balances. I was about to perform a forensic autopsy on my own family. In my years with the Bureau, I had learned that people lie. Witnesses lie. Suspects lie. Even victims lie. But math never lies. Money leaves a trail, a slime trail, like a slug moving across a sidewalk, and if you know how to adjust the contrast, you can see exactly where it went and where it came from. I opened a secure browser. I didn't go to Google. I went to a portal used by private investigators and Skip Tracers, a database that aggregated public records, credit headers, and banking data. It was expensive to access, but I kept my subscription active. It was my only hobby. I started with Jason. I typed in his social security number. I hesitated for a fraction of a second before hitting enter. There is a specific kind of pain in investigating your own blood. It feels like violating a sacred covenant. But Jason had violated the covenant first when he tried to extort me at 3 a.m. I hit enter. The screen populated with data. It was a sea of red ink. I scrolled through his employment history first. According to the Bureau of Labor Statistics and his tax filings, Jason hadn't received a paycheck from a legitimate employer in 26 months. 2 years. For 2 years, he had been leaving his house every morning in a suit, carrying a briefcase and going, where? I pulled his credit card statements. The data stream was a timeline of a man unraveling. 2 years ago, the spending was normal. Groceries, gas, utilities. Then the paycheck stopped. The severance package hit a lump sum that lasted 4 months. After that, the descent began. I saw the cash advances. $500 here, $200 there. Interest rates of 24%. He was paying off one card with another, shifting the debt around like a shell game, hoping the music wouldn't stop. Then I saw the locations. The Lucky 7 Casino, the Golden Nugget, online transfers to DraftKings and FanDuel. It started small, $50 bets on Sunday football. Then it accelerated. Tuesday nights at the casino, Withdrawals at ATMs near the racetrack. I pulled up a graph of his withdrawals over the last 6 months. It looked like the EKG of a heart attack. Spikes of manic spending followed by flat lines of desperation. He wasn't just unemployed. He was a degenerate gambler. He was chasing the dragon, trying to win back what he had lost, digging the hole deeper with every hand. I looked at the timestamps. 3 a.m. withdrawals. 4 a.m. withdrawals. He was living a vampire existence, bleeding his future dry while the rest of the world slept. But gambling didn't explain everything. Gambling explains poverty. It doesn't explain the connection to Richard Sterling. I opened a new tab. I typed in Sterling Global Holdings. Richard had lied about his assets, but I needed to know the mechanics of his lie. I needed to know the architecture of his fraud. I pulled the corporate filings from Nevada, Delaware, and the Cayman Islands. It took me an hour to untangle the web. Richard had created a labyrinth of LLCs. Sterling Global owned Sterling Real Estate, which owned SG Development, which was a subsidiary of a shell company registered in a P.O. box in Panama. It was a classic structure designed to confuse auditors and hide the fact that there was no actual product, no buildings, no land, no technology. I looked at the cash flow, or rather, the lack of it. Richard was running a Ponzi scheme, a textbook pyramid. He was taking money from new investors, promising them 20% returns, and using that cash to pay dividends to the older investors, keeping the illusion of profitability alive, while skimming off the top to pay for his Bentley and his linen suits. But the well had run dry. The inflow of new suckers had stopped about 6 months ago. The graph of his liquidity was a nosedive. And that was when Jason showed up in the data. I overlaid Jason's financial timeline with Richard's. The correlation was perfect. 3 months ago, Richard's personal accounts hit zero. He was facing eviction from his penthouse. 2 days later, Jason opened a joint account with him. I clicked on that account. Blackwood and Sterling Ventures. It sounded legitimate. It was anything but. I traced the deposits. Jason had deposited $20,000. Where did he get $20,000? If he was broke, I followed the routing number back. It was a personal loan. A high-interest unsecured loan from a company called Quick Cash Solutions. A predatory lender. Jason had borrowed money at 30% interest to give to Richard. Why? I dug deeper into the emails associated with the account. I found a digital paper trail of manipulation. Richard hadn't just asked for money. He had sold Jason a dream. He had convinced my son that buying into the firm was his ticket to the big leagues. He had promised Jason a partnership, a corner office respect. He had preyed on Jason's insecurity. He knew Jason felt small. He knew Jason felt like a failure because he had lost his job. So Richard offered him a costume. He let Jason play businessman while Richard drained him dry. I watched the money leave the joint account. It didn't go into investments. It went to pay Richard's back rent. It went to pay the lease on the Bentley, us. It went to pay for a vacation to the Bahamas that Vanessa had posted all over Facebook. My son had gone into debt to pay for his father-in-law's tan. But $20,000 burns fast when you are pretending to be a millionaire. The account was empty again within weeks, and that brought us to today. The crash, the demand for $45,000. I looked at the transaction history for Richard Sterling one more time. I was looking for a specific number. 45,000. I found it, not as a deposit but as a demand. A judgment had been entered against Richard Sterling in civil court 3 weeks ago. A disgruntled investor had sued and won. The judgment was for $45,000. If Richard didn't pay by tomorrow, the court would issue a bench warrant for his arrest for contempt. That was the deadline. That was the emergency. Vanessa wasn't dying. Richard was about to go to jail, and he had sent his daughter and son-in-law out to rob me, to keep himself out of handcuffs. I sat back, rubbing my eyes. The cruelty of it was breathtaking. Richard was willing to let my son catch a felony charge to save his own skin. But there was one loose thread. I looked at the screen again. There was a recent inquiry on my own credit report. I frowned. I hadn't applied for credit in 10 years. My house was paid off. My truck was paid off. I paid cash for everything. I clicked on the inquiry. It was dated 4 days ago. Inquiry source: Ironclad Capital Lending. I knew Ironclad Capital. They weren't a bank. They were a hard money lender. The kind of place you go when the banks laugh you out of the room. They lent money against assets. Real, tangible assets. Why were they looking at my credit? A cold stone of dread formed in my gut. Hard money lenders don't check credit scores for fun. They check them when they are underwriting a loan secured by property. I navigated to the county recorder's website. Public records. Property liens. I typed in my address. 42 Maple Street. The search wheel spun. My heart beat in rhythm with the cursor. Search results 1, record found. I clicked it. A document opened on the screen. It was a deed of trust. A mortgage document. Recorded yesterday. Grantor Gideon Blackwood. Grantee Ironclad Capital Lending. Amount $350,000. I stopped breathing. $350,000. I scrolled down to the bottom of the PDF. I needed to see the signature. There it was. Gideon Blackwood. I stared at it. It looked like my signature. The loop of the G was wide. The B was sharp. To a clerk at the county office, it would pass. To a teller, it would pass. But I was a forensic analyst. I had spent a career looking at handwriting samples under a microscope. I zoomed in on the screen until the pixels blurred. A natural signature has flow. It has speed. The ink is lighter on the upstrokes and heavier on the downstrokes because the hand is moving in a fluid motion. This signature was flat. The line weight was consistent all the way through, and there were hesitations, micro-tremors, little dots of ink where the pen had paused for a fraction of a second while the hand adjusted its position. This wasn't written. It was drawn. It was a tracing. Someone had taken a document with my real signature, probably an old birthday card or a check, and traced it onto this mortgage deed. I looked at the notary stamp. Paul Giamatti, Notary Public. I looked up Paul Giamatti. Not the actor. The notary. His license had been revoked 2 years ago for fraud. He was a ghost notary, a man who would stamp anything for $500. I looked at the witness signature. Jason Blackwood. My son. My son had forged my signature. He had stolen the deed to my house, and he had mortgaged it to a predatory lender for $350,000. The money hadn't been disbursed yet. Hard money loans take a few days to clear title and funding. That was the grace period. They were waiting for the wire. That explained the desperation. That explained the car. The $45,000 for the surgery was just the appetizer. It was the quick cash Richard needed to stay out of jail today. But the house. The house was the main course. Richard intended to take the $350,000, pay off his debts, and likely vanish, leaving me with a mortgage I couldn't pay on a house I had owned free and clear for 20 years. I would be evicted. I would be homeless. At 72 years old. And Jason had helped him. I felt a physical pain in my chest, sharp and jagged. It wasn't a heart attack. It was the feeling of the last tether of fatherhood snapping. I had excused the car stripping. I had excused the lies. I had told myself he was desperate, he was weak. He was influenced by his wife. But this was matricide by proxy. This was a calculated attempt to destroy my life to feed a con man. I printed the document. The printer whirred in the quiet room, spitting out the proof of my son's betrayal. I picked up the paper. It was still warm. I looked around the office. The dust motes dancing in the light of the monitor seemed to freeze. I wasn't a father anymore. I was an auditor. And I had just found a massive discrepancy in the books. I needed to trace the wire instructions. If the loan had been approved, the money was scheduled to move. I checked the status on the lender's portal using the loan number from the document. Status approved. Funding scheduled tomorrow, 9:00 a.m. Tomorrow morning. I had less than 24 hours to stop a wire transfer that would bankrupt me. But stopping it wasn't enough. If I just called the lender and claimed fraud, they would freeze it, investigate it, and Richard would slip away. He would find another mark. He would disappear, and Jason would be left holding the bag, claiming ignorance, claiming he was tricked. No. I didn't want to just stop the money. I wanted to catch them reaching for it. I wanted Richard Sterling to walk into a room thinking he was a king and walk out in handcuffs. I needed to let them think they had won. I picked up my phone. I dialed O'Malley's private line again. "Did you open the file?" I asked. "I did." O'Malley sounded worried. "Gideon, are you sure about this? I am sending you a document. A deed of trust. It is a forgery." "Jesus, Gideon. They mortgaged your house." "Yes. Funding is scheduled for tomorrow morning. We need to file an injunction immediately. We need to call the lender." "No." "What do you mean, no? If we call the lender, the deal dies quietly." Richard walks. "So what do you want to do?" "I want to let the closing happen." "Are you insane? If that money moves, it won't move to them. I want you to contact the lender's fraud department. Use your contact at the bureau. Tell them we are cooperating. Tell them to issue the clear to close. Tell them to generate the wire confirmation number. You want to sting them. I want a controlled delivery. I want Richard Sterling to sign the final disbursement papers. I want his fingerprints on the check. I want Jason to witness it." "Gideon, this is high risk. If something goes wrong, nothing will go wrong. Because I am going to be there." "Where?" "I am going to invite them to a signing party. Here. At the house they think they just stole. You are going to invite the man who tried to rob you to dinner. Not dinner, O'Malley, a closing ceremony. I am going to tell them I have decided to sell. I am going to tell them I am giving up. I am going to play the senile old fool one last time. And then I am going to introduce them to the real owner of the debt." "Who is that?" "The Federal Bureau of Investigation." I hung up. I looked at the forged signature one last time. Gideon Blackwood. It looked weak. Shaky. I took a pen from my desk. On a blank sheet of paper I signed my name. It was sharp, angular, violent. I folded the forged deed and put it in my pocket. I turned off the computer. The screen went black, plunging the room back into twilight. I walked out of the office and locked the door. I went to the kitchen and began to prepare. I needed to set the stage. I needed to look defeated. I took my heart medication bottles out of the cabinet and left them on the counter uncapped. I pulled a blanket off the sofa and draped it over my shoulders. I practiced a tremor in my hand. Then I picked up the phone and called Jason. He answered on the first ring. He must have been out on bail by now, paid for by whatever scraps Richard had scraped together, or maybe a favor called in from a shark. "Dad." His voice was cautious. "Jason." I made my voice sound thin. "Reedy, I have been thinking. About what you said. About the money." "Yeah." "I am tired, Jason. I am so tired. The police, the car." It is too much for me. I don't want to fight anymore. Dad, are you okay? You sound... I am old, Jason. I realized that today. I can't manage this house anymore. I can't manage my affairs. There was a silence on the line. A hungry silence. What are you saying, Dad? I want to sell. I want to sell the house. I want to give you the money. For Vanessa. For the surgery. For whatever you need. I just want to go to a home. Somewhere quiet. I heard him cover the phone. I heard muffled, excited whispering. He was telling her. He was telling Richard. The fish had taken the hook. That is a good decision, Dad. We can help you. Richard knows investors. He can buy the house cash. Fast close. No inspections. Good. That is good. Tell him to come over. Tonight. Bring the papers. I will sign whatever you want. Tonight. Yes. Before I change my mind. Before I... forget. Okay, Dad. We are coming. We will be there in an hour. Okay, son. Hurry. I hung up. I walked to the window and looked out at my front lawn. The grass was green. The oak tree I had planted 30 years ago was tall and strong. They thought they were coming to harvest. They didn't know they were walking into a threshing machine. I sat on the porch in the gathering dark waiting for the headlights. I had called the bail bondsman an hour ago. It cost me $10,000 non-refundable to get them out, plus the collateral signature I had to fake a tremor to sign. It was a lot of money to spend on 2 people I planned to send to federal prison, but you cannot stage a play without the actors. They needed to be here. They needed to be desperate, and they needed to believe I was their savior. When the taxi finally pulled up to the curb, it looked like a hearse delivering the living dead. The door opened, and Jason stepped out. He looked worse than he had in the cell. His suit was rumpled beyond saving the grease stains on the cuffs, now dark and set. He walked with a slump, his shoulders curved inward as if he were trying to protect his vital organs from a blow he knew was coming. Vanessa followed him. She had tried to clean up in the precinct bathroom, but the result was just a smearing of the grime. Her mascara had run into the fine lines around her eyes, creating a mask of exhaustion. She wasn't carrying her designer purse with the arrogant swing she usually had. She was clutching it to her chest like a shield. I didn't stand up. I stayed in the rocking chair, the woolen blanket draped over my knees, my hands resting on the armrests with a deliberate, practiced shake. I let my mouth hang open slightly, just a fraction of an inch, the way I had seen my own father do in his final months. Dad. Jason's voice was a croak. I looked at him. I let my eyes lose focus for a second, before sharpening on his face. Jason. Is that you? He ran up the steps and threw himself at my feet. It was a dramatic gesture, one he must have rehearsed in the back of the taxi. He grabbed my knees, burying his face in the blanket. I am so sorry, Dad. I am so sorry. You were right. We should have told you. We should have told you everything. I patted his head. My hand felt the grease in his hair. It was repulsive, but I forced myself to stroke his hair like a comforting parent. It is okay, son. I paid the man. You are home now. You are safe. No. Vanessa climbed the steps behind him. She didn't kneel. She stood there shivering in the warm night air. Her eyes were wide, darting around the yard, looking at the shadows of the trees, as if gunmen were hiding in the hydrangeas. We are not safe, Gideon. We are not safe at all. Jason looked up. His face was wet with tears and snot. Real tears this time. Fear is a powerful diuretic for the truth. She is right, Dad. The police are the least of our problems. The people we owe money to, They aren't banks. They aren't credit card companies. I leaned forward, putting a tremor in my voice. Who are they, Jason? Who did you borrow money from? He couldn't say it. He looked at Vanessa. She took a step closer and lowered her voice to a harsh whisper. Ironclad Capital. And a man named Vinny. We borrowed $45,000 from Vinny to pay the interest on the other loans. It was due today, Gideon. Today. That is why we needed the money last night. That is why we tried to use the car. She started to cry, dry, heaving sobs that racked her thin frame. They told us if we didn't pay by midnight, they would come for us. They said they would hurt Jason. They said they would hurt Olivia. I felt a cold spike of rage at the mention of my granddaughter, but I pushed it down. I needed to stay in character. I needed to be the confused, frightened old man, not the federal agent who knew exactly who Vinny was and knew that Vinny was actually a low-level enforcer who talked loud but rarely crossed the line into murder. But the fear was real. They were terrified. And that was my lever. Oh my God, I said, raising a shaking hand to my mouth. Criminals. You borrowed money from criminals. We had no choice. Jason sobbed. Richard's accounts were frozen. It was a mistake, a banking error, but we couldn't wait. We tried to fix it, Dad. We tried. I looked at Vanessa. Where is your father now? He is trying to raise the money, she said. He is meeting with investors right now. But he needs time. And we don't have time. If Vinny finds out we got arrested, if he finds out we don't have the cash. She let the sentence hang in the air. I closed my eyes. I let my breathing become shallow, audible. I clutched at my chest, just a little theatrically over the heart. My pills, I whispered. Jason jumped up. Dad, are you okay? My chest. I need inside. The kitchen. He helped me stand. I leaned my entire weight on him, forcing him to stagger. He smelled of jail soap and fear. We walked into the house, Vanessa trailing behind us, locking the front door and checking the deadbolt twice. They sat me down at the kitchen table. Jason fumbled with the pill bottles on the counter, shaking 2 tablets into his hand and pressing them to my lips. They were just baby aspirin, but he didn't know that. I swallowed them with a gulp of water he held for me. I sat there panting, waiting for the color to return to my face, or at least for them to think it had. I can't let them hurt you, I said, my voice weak. You are my son. You are all I have. We don't know what to do, Dad, Jason said, dropping into the chair opposite me. We are trapped. I looked around the kitchen. I looked at the granite countertops I had installed for my wife 10 years ago. I looked at the family photos on the fridge. There is a way, I said softly. They both looked at me. I am old Jason, I said, repeating the lines I had practiced. I am tired. I don't need this house. It is too big. Too many stairs. I forget things. Yesterday, I left the stove on. I could have burned the place down. Vanessa's eyes narrowed slightly. She was listening. The predator in her was waking up, smelling blood in the water. What are you saying, Gideon? Sell it, I said. Sell the house. Jason shook his head. Dad, we can't. A sale takes months. We need money tonight. Tomorrow morning at the latest. A realtor takes too long. The inspections, not a realtor. I interrupted him. Richard. Yes. Vanessa said that Richard knows investors. She said he buys houses cash. Fast close. I looked at Vanessa. She was staring at me and I could see the gears turning in her head. She was wondering if I was senile or just desperate. She looked at my shaking hands. She looked at the pill bottles. She decided I was broken. Yes, she said slowly. My father has a private equity fund. They buy distressed assets. They can close in 24 hours, sometimes less. Call him, I said. Tell him to buy the house. I don't care about the price. Just give me enough to pay these men, to pay Vinny, to save my son. Jason looked at his wife. Then he looked at me. Dad, are you sure? This is your home. Mom loved this house. I reached out and took his hand. It was cold and clammy. Mom is gone, Jason. And I will be gone soon too. My heart. The doctor said it isn't good. I don't want to die leaving you in debt. I don't want to die knowing thugs are hunting you. Let me do this. Let me be a father one last time. Tears welled up in his eyes again, but this time they weren't fear. They were relief and guilt. A deep, toxic guilt that he would bury under the money. Okay, Dad. Okay. Vanessa was already on her phone. She had moved to the corner of the kitchen, her back to us, whispering furiously. I caught snippets of it. He agreed. Yes, tonight. Bring the notary. No, he is ready. He is scared. She turned back to us. Her face was composed, but her eyes were gleaming with triumph. He is coming, she said. He was at a dinner, but he is leaving now. He is bringing the papers. He says he can wire the funds to Vinny directly as soon as you sign. He can make the problem go away tonight. Thank God, I whispered. I slumped back in the chair, closing my eyes. Jason sat there watching me. I wondered if he saw the man who had raised him, or if he just saw a signature on a page. Dad, he said softly. Where will you go? I kept my eyes closed. The nursing home. The one on Elm Street. They have a room. I called them last week. I think it is time. You called them. I get confused, Jason. I get lost in the hallways sometimes. I am afraid. It was a lie. I was as sharp as a razor. But it was the lie they wanted to hear. It confirmed their narrative. It justified their theft. See, they would tell themselves, he wanted to go. We are just helping him. Good. That is good, Dad. We will visit you every day. I nodded. Go wash up, son. You look terrible. Put on one of my old suits. If Richard is coming, we should look respectable. He nodded and stood up. He looked at Vanessa. She gave him a small, tight nod. They had won. The siege was over. The castle gates were open. They left the room to get changed. I sat alone in the kitchen. I stopped shaking my hand. I opened my eyes. I looked at the clock on the stove. 7:30. Richard would be here by 8:30. I needed to make one more call. I pulled a burner phone from my pocket. I had bought it cash 2 years ago for situations exactly like this. I dialed a number that didn't appear in any phone book. It picked up on the first ring. Agent Miller. It is Blackwood. Gideon. We got the packet you sent over. The credit analysis on Sterling. It is solid work. I know it is. I am about to give you the rest. What do you mean? Sterling is coming to my house. In 1 hour. He is bringing a fraudulent deed of trust and a wire transfer authorization for $350,000. He is going to try to execute a mortgage fraud scheme in my kitchen. We can't move that fast, Gideon. We need a warrant. We need probable cause. I am giving you probable cause. I am the victim. I am inviting you in. It is risky. If he smells a rat, he walks. He won't smell a rat. He smells money. He is desperate, Miller. He has a bench warrant executing tomorrow morning for civil contempt. He needs this cash to stay out of jail. He will be careless. And your son, my son, is the witness and the co-conspirator. Gideon, are you sure you want to do this? Once we step through that door, I know what happens, Miller. Just have your team down the street. No sirens, no lights. I want him to sign the papers. I want the ink wet. Then you come in, okay? We will be there. 8:30. I hung up and destroyed the SIM card, dropping the pieces into the garbage disposal. I stood up and walked to the sink. I splashed cold water on my face. I looked at my reflection in the dark window. I looked old. I looked tired. Perfect. I heard footsteps on the stairs. Jason was coming back down wearing my gray suit from 10 years ago. It was a little tight in the shoulders, but it made him look like the man he could have been if he hadn't been weak. "You look good, son." I lied. "Thanks, Dad." The doorbell rang. It was a sharp, aggressive sound. "That is him," Vanessa said, rushing down the stairs. She had changed into one of her own dresses she had left in the guest room. She had reapplied her makeup. She looked ready for a gala, not a felony. "Let him in, Jason," I said, sinking back into my chair and resuming my tremor. Jason walked to the door. I heard the lock turn. Richard Sterling swept into the house carrying a leather briefcase and wearing a fresh suit, a navy blue double-breasted number that screamed authority. He walked straight into the kitchen, ignoring Jason, ignoring Vanessa. He looked at me. He didn't see an adversary anymore. He saw a carcass. "Gideon," he said, his voice dripping with fake sympathy. "I got here as fast as I could. Vanessa told me the situation. It is tragic. Truly tragic. But we are family. And family cleans up each other's messes." He placed the briefcase on the table. The latches clicked open loud in the quiet room. He pulled out a stack of documents, thick legal paper bound with blue clips. "I have prepared everything. A standard purchase agreement, and an expedited power of attorney just to handle the transfer of funds to these creditors. We can have this nightmare over in 10 minutes. He uncapped a heavy fountain pen. It was a Mont Blanc. Probably fake, too. He held it out to me. Sign here, Gideon. And here. And here." I looked at the pen. I looked at his smiling, predatory face. I reached out my hand, shaking violently. "Help me, Jason," I whispered. "I can't hold the pen." Jason stepped forward. He put his hand over mine, steadying it. His hand was warm. "It is okay, Dad. Just sign your name. Just like you taught me." I looked at my son one last time. I gave him a chance, a final chance to stop. "Are you sure this is the right thing to do, Jason?" "Yes, Dad. It is the only way." I looked down at the paper. I signed, Gideon Blackwood. The signature was shaky, weak, pathetic. Richard snatched the paper away before the ink was dry. He signed his own name with a flourish. "Richard Sterling." "There," he said triumphantly. "Done. The house is safe. The money is on its way." He pulled out his phone. "I am authorizing the wire now. Vinny will have his money in 10 minutes. He tapped the screen. Wire initiated. He smiled at me, a shark's smile. "You did the right thing, Gideon. You can rest now. Go to your room. We will take it from here." I didn't move. I stopped shaking. I sat up straight. I placed my hands flat on the table. "Actually, Richard," I said, my voice suddenly clear, deep, and steady, "I think I will stay." Richard frowned. "What?" I said, "I am staying, and so are you." The confusion on his face was delicious. "What are you talking about, old man? You just sold me this house. It is mine. Get out." No, Richard. I didn't sell you the house. I just let you sign a confession. I looked at the window. Now, Miller. The front door didn't just open. It exploded inward. FBI federal agents, nobody move. The kitchen filled with men in windbreakers with yellow letters. Weapons were drawn. Richard dropped his phone. Jason screamed. Vanessa tried to run to the back door, but a female agent was already there blocking the exit. Richard Sterling. Agent Miller stepped into the light. You are under arrest for wire fraud, bank fraud, and racketeering. He looked at me. His eyes were wide with shock. You set me up. I stood up. I picked up the documents he had just signed. Forensic accounting, Richard. You follow the money, and sometimes you help the money find its way to jail. I looked at Jason. He was being handcuffed, his face pressed against my granite counter. He was looking at me, crying. Dad. I looked at him. I didn't feel sadness anymore. I just felt the cold, clean satisfaction of a ledger that finally balanced. I told you, son, I said quietly. Call her father. He is the one who handles things. I turned my back on them and walked out of the kitchen, leaving the chaos behind me. The air outside was fresh. The stars were bright. It was done. The smell of takeout food filled my dining room, a cloying mix of sweet and sour sauce and MSG that seemed to coat the back of my throat. Vanessa had ordered it. She said she wanted to cook a celebratory meal, but there just wasn't time with all the arrangements being made. That was the first lie of the evening. The truth was she didn't want to dirty a kitchen she already considered hers. She wanted to keep it pristine for the listing photos she was probably already planning in her head. I sat at the head of my mahogany table, the same table where I had carved turkeys for 20 years, where I had helped Jason with his algebra homework, where I had held my wife's hand when we got the diagnosis. Now it felt like a negotiation table in a hostile takeover. Jason sat to my right. He was wearing my old gray suit still, but he had loosened the tie. He was drinking whiskey, my whiskey a single malt I had been saving for a special occasion. He was drinking it like it was water, gulping it down to drown the conscience that was scratching at the back of his mind. Vanessa sat to my left. She was radiant. The grime of the jail cell was gone, replaced by a silk blouse and a predatory smile. She was tapping away on her phone, likely looking up luxury vacation rentals or handbags. And opposite me at the foot of the table sat Richard Sterling. He had returned with a leather portfolio that looked thick and heavy. He had placed it on the table next to the carton of fried rice, treating it with the reverence of a holy scripture. So, Gideon, Richard said, leaning back and swirling his wine. This is a sensible decision. A hard one, I know, but sensible. You are doing the right thing for your legacy. I nodded slowly, letting my head bob a little too much like a bobblehead on a dashboard. I kept my hands below the table, clutching a napkin to hide the fact that they were perfectly steady. I just want to be safe, I said, my voice trembling. I am afraid, Richard. The police, the men Jason owes money to. I just want it all to stop. It will stop, Richard assured me, his voice oozing false comfort. That is why we are here. To build a wall around you. A financial fortress. Vanessa reached over and patted my arm. Her nails were long and sharp. You know, Gideon, you really haven't been yourself lately, she said, her tone dripping with that patronizing sweetness nurses use on difficult patients. Just yesterday, you forgot where you parked the car. Remember, you called me in a panic. I blinked. I hadn't called her yesterday. I hadn't lost the car in 10 years. I don't remember that, I stammered. See, Jason. Vanessa looked at my son. He doesn't remember. It is getting worse, honey. The memory gaps. Last week he left the front door wide open all night. Anyone could have walked in. Jason looked at his glass. He knew it was a lie. He knew I checked the locks 3 times every night. but he nodded. Yeah, Dad. You have been slipping. It is scary. We are just worried about you. This was the gaslighting. They were rewriting reality in real time, building a narrative of incompetence. They weren't just doing it to convince me, they were doing it to convince themselves. If they could believe I was senile, then they weren't stealing my house, they were managing it. They were the heroes saving the old man from his own decaying mind. It is terrifying, isn't it? Gideon Richard interjected, leaning forward. The mind goes first. My own father. Tragic. He signed away his estate to a nurse he had known for a week. We barely got it back in court. You need protection, Gideon. You need a steward. He opened the leather portfolio. He slid a thick stack of documents across the polished wood. This is what I have prepared. It is not just a sale, Gideon. A sale is taxable. A sale is messy. This is an asset protection transfer agreement. I looked at the papers. The font was small, dense legal gibberish designed to intimidate. I put on my reading glasses, my hands shaking as I adjusted the frames. Transfer. I read out loud, stumbling over the word. But I thought you were buying it. I am buying it, Richard said smoothly. But we are structuring it as a transfer to a trust, the Sterling Family Trust. It protects the equity from creditors. It keeps the government's hands out of your pockets. You transfer the deed to the trust, and the trust manages the payout to your son's creditors. It is cleaner, faster. I looked at the document. It was garbage. It was a quitclaim deed wrapped in fancy language. It transferred title of my property to his trust for the consideration of $10 and other good and valuable consideration. There was no mention of the $350,000. There was no mention of paying Vinny. Once I signed this, Richard would own my house and I would have nothing but a promise from a liar. But I couldn't say that. Not yet. I needed him to say it. I needed him to explain the mechanics of his fraud on tape. I don't understand these words, Richard, I said, pushing the paper away slightly. It says $10. My house is worth, it is worth more than $10. Richard laughed, a condescending chuckle that made my teeth ache. That is just legal boilerplate, Gideon. A formality. The real value is in the management. If we put the actual price on paper, the IRS will come looking for capital gains tax. They will take 40%. Do you want the government to take 40% of Jason's inheritance? No, I whispered. No taxes. Exactly. Vanessa chimed in, pouring more wine into my glass, even though I hadn't touched it. My dad is a genius with this stuff, Gideon. He uses these trusts for all his properties. It is how rich people stay rich. I looked at the wine glass. It was full to the brim, a dark red pool. I needed to check the recorder. I needed to make sure it was capturing this clear admission of tax fraud. I reached for the glass, allowing my hand to spasm. My fingers hit the stem. The glass tipped. Oh no, I cried out, as the wine spilled across the table, soaking into the tablecloth and dripping onto the floor. Dad, watch out! Jason yelled, jumping up. I am sorry, I am so sorry, I wailed, pushing my chair back. I am so clumsy. Look at what I did. It is okay, Gideon, Richard said, though his eyes flashed with annoyance. It is just wine. I dropped my napkin. Let me get it, I said, bending down. No, Dad, leave it, Vanessa snapped. But I was already under the table. The world under the dining table was a different place. It was dark quiet. I saw their feet. Richard's polished shoes with the cracked leather. Jason's scuffed dress shoes tapping nervously. Vanessa's high heels. I saw the recorder taped to the underside of the table support right in the center. The little red light was glowing steady and bright. It was working. I reached out and adjusted the angle, slightly pointing the microphone directly toward Richard's seat. I grabbed the sodden napkin and hauled myself back up, groaning with the effort of a man 20 years older than I actually was. "I am useless," I muttered, wiping at the spill. "Useless. You are not useless, Gideon," Richard said impatiently. "You are just tired. Now let's get back to the trust." I sat down. I looked at him with wide, watery eyes. "Richard," I said, my voice taking on a tone of reverent curiosity, "this trust, the Sterling Trust, Vanessa says you use it for everything. Is that how you bought the building downtown? The one Vanessa showed me pictures of?" Richard preened. "Vanity is the ultimate weakness of the con artist. They cannot resist taking credit for their crimes if you frame them as accomplishments." "The Plaza Tower." "Yes. We moved that through the trust last year. It is a charitable remainder trust, Gideon. Very sophisticated." "Charitable?" I asked. "But isn't charity for giving money away? I need this money for Jason." Richard smiled a conspiratorial grin. "That is the beauty of it. It is a charity on paper. The Sterling Foundation. We donate the assets to the foundation, which gives us the tax write-off. But who controls the foundation? You do, I guessed. I do. And as the director of the foundation, I can allocate funds for administrative costs, salaries, consulting fees. The money goes in tax-free and it comes out. Well, it comes out as salary to the family." I felt a surge of cold satisfaction. He had just admitted to self-dealing wire fraud and tax evasion in 3 sentences. "So," I said, playing the fool, "if I give you my house, the money comes back to Jason as a salary." "Precisely," Richard said, tapping the table. "We hire Jason as a consultant. We pay him the value of the house over time. No taxes. No creditors can touch it. Vinny can't touch it because Jason doesn't technically own it. The foundation does." "And Vinny," I asked, "how do we pay him tonight?" "I have a slush fund," Richard whispered, leaning in. "Cash. Off the books. Off the wall. I will handle Vinny personally tonight. Once you sign." It was a lie. There was no cash. He was going to use the deed to get a hard money loan, probably the one Jason had already set up, and use that to pay his own debts. Jason would never see a dime. But the admission was beautiful. Slush fund. Off the books. "And you have done this before?" I asked, widening my eyes. "With other people?" "Many times," Richard bragged. "I have helped dozens of families protect their assets. The government tries to take everything, Gideon. You have to be smarter than them. You have to move the shells faster than they can look." He was confessing to a pattern of racketeering. RICO predicates. O'Malley was going to love this. Jason was quiet. He was drinking faster now. He wasn't looking at me. He was looking at the window, as if he expected the police to burst in any second. He didn't know how right he was. "Dad," Jason said, his voice thick. "Just sign it. Please, let's just get it over with." I looked at my son. "Do you understand this, Jason?" I asked. "Do you understand what your father-in-law is doing?" "He understands," Richard cut in. "He is a smart boy. He knows this is the only way out." I looked at Jason again, waiting, hoping. "Give me one sign, son. One sign that you know this is wrong. One sign that you are trying to protect me." Jason looked at Richard, then at Vanessa. Vanessa nodded at him a sharp command. "It is the best way, Dad," Jason said, looking at the table. "Richard knows what he is doing." The final tether snapped. There was no son left, just a co-conspirator. "Okay," I said, letting out a long sigh. "Okay. I will sign." I reached for the pen Richard was holding out. It was the heavy Mont Blanc, the fake one. My hand shook violently as I took it. I held it over the paper. The tip of the pen hovered over the signature line. "Wait," I said, lowering the pen. "What now?" Vanessa hissed. I can't see the lines. It is too dark. My eyes. The doctor said the cataracts are getting worse. It is bright in here, Gideon Richards said through gritted teeth. No, no, I need my other glasses. The strong ones. They are in my study. I will get them, Vanessa said, standing up. Where are they? No, I said sharply. No one goes in my study. It is messy. I am ashamed. I will get them. I stood up using the table for support. It will just take a minute. Pour me another glass of wine, Richard. To celebrate. I shuffled out of the room. I walked down the hallway, my posture stooped, my feet dragging on the floorboards. As soon as I turned the corner and was out of their sight line, I straightened up. The tremor in my hands vanished. I walked silently to the study door. I unlocked it and slipped inside, leaving the door cracked just an inch so I could hear them. I didn't need glasses. I needed to send the signal. I went to the computer. It was already on the screen, glowing in the dark room. I opened the secure chat window. O'Malley was online. Status green. I typed quickly. Subject Sterling. Status confession recorded. Wire fraud, tax evasion, money laundering admitted. Location residence. Action. Proceed to phase 2. I hit send. I waited for the confirmation. Received. Assets frozen. Warrants active. Team is 5 minutes out. I closed the laptop. I stood there for a moment in the dark, surrounded by the dust of my old life. I looked at the framed certificate on the wall. Distinguished Service Award. Federal Bureau of Investigation. I wasn't a victim. I wasn't a senile old man. I was the hammer. I walked back to the door. I hunched my shoulders again. I put the mask back on. I could hear them talking in the dining room. Their voices were louder now, confident. He is totally gone, Vanessa was saying. Did you see him spill the wine? He is pathetic. He is useful, Richard corrected her. Once he signs, we evict him. We put him in the state home, the Medicaid facility. We don't need to pay for a private one. What about the house? Jason asked. We flip it, Richard said. Quick sale. We take the equity and we run. I have a contact in Costa Rica. We can be there by the weekend. Costa Rica, Jason asked. Yes. We need a vacation. And your father? Well, he won't know the difference. He won't remember where he is in a month. I stood in the hallway listening. They weren't just stealing my house. They were planning to dump me in a state ward and flee the country. I felt a cold calm settle over me. It was the feeling of a case closing, the feeling of the steel trap snapping shut. I walked back into the dining room. I found them, I said, holding up a pair of old reading glasses I had grabbed from the desk. Good, Richard said. Sit down, Gideon. Let's finish this. I sat down. I put on the glasses. I looked at the document. I looked at Richard. He was smiling that shark smile. You know, Richard, I said, my voice quavering slightly. I was thinking about what you said, about the strong eating the weak. Yes, Richard said, impatient. Nature's law, Gideon. I picked up the pen. I think you are right, I said. I think that is exactly how the world works. I looked at Jason. I hope you learned something tonight, son. I really do. What do you mean, Dad? Jason asked, nervous. I mean, I said that sometimes the weak aren't as weak as they look, and sometimes the strong are just fat. Richard frowned. What are you babbling about? Sign the damn paper. I lowered the pen to the paper. But I didn't sign. I drew a line. A long, slow, diagonal line across the entire page, crossing out the text. What are you doing? Vanessa screamed. I looked up. I took off the glasses and threw them on the table. I dropped the pen. I stopped shaking. I sat back in my chair, crossing my arms. I am not signing Richard, I said. My voice suddenly deep resonant, the voice of the man who had terrified embezzlers for 3 decades. Richard looked at the paper, then at me. His face went slack. What? What is this? You agreed. I lied, I said. Just like you lied about the surgery. Just like you lied about the Cayman Islands. Just like you lied about your watch. He stood up, knocking his chair over. You senile old fool. You are making a mistake. Vinny will be here in an hour. He will break your legs. Vinny isn't coming, I said calmly. Vinny was arrested 20 minutes ago. Ironclad Capital was raided by the FBI this afternoon. The room went silent. Absolute dead silence. What Vanessa whispered. I looked at her. I know about the credit cards, Vanessa. I know about the loans. I know Jason forged my signature on the mortgage deed yesterday. Jason turned white. Dad. How? I am a forensic accountant, Jason. I track money for a living. Did you really think you could steal $350,000 from me and I wouldn't notice? I turned to Richard. And you? Sterling Global Holdings, a Ponzi scheme built on sand. You are insolvent, Richard. You have been broke for 3 years. You are using my son as a bagman to launder money for a loan shark because you ran out of investors to scam. Richard's face was purple. Veins bulged in his neck. Who do you think you are talking to? I will bury you. I have lawyers. You have a public defender in your future. I cut him off. And you are going to need a good one. Because I recorded everything. I pointed under the table. There is a voice recorder taped under there, Richard. You just confessed to tax evasion, wire fraud, and conspiracy to commit elder abuse. It is all on tape. Richard looked under the table. He saw the red light. He lunged. He scrambled for the recorder, tearing it loose. Give me that, he screamed. He threw it against the wall. It shattered. Plastic pieces flew everywhere. He turned to me, panting, wild-eyed. There, he roared. No evidence. It is your word against mine. And nobody believes a senile old man. I smiled. It was the smile of a hunter who has just watched the prey walk into the pit. That was a backup, Richard. The primary feed was live. Live. I pulled my phone out of my pocket. I held it up. The screen showed a call in progress. Duration 45 minutes. Who is on the phone? Vanessa whispered. I put it on speaker. Hello, O'Malley. Did you get all that? The voice from the phone was loud and clear. Every word, Gideon. The audio is crystal clear. And Agent Miller. Are you there? Yes, Mr. Blackwood. We are ready. Richard looked at the phone. He looked at the window. He ran. He bolted for the front door, scrambling over the fallen chair. He grabbed the handle and yanked it open. He didn't get far. Bright LED tactical lights flooded the hallway, blinding him. Federal agents' hands, where I can see them. Richard stumbled back, shielding his eyes. Men in body armor poured into the house. They moved with the precision of a machine. Richard was slammed against the wall. Handcuffs clicked. Vanessa screamed. Jason just sat in his chair, staring at me, his mouth open, tears streaming down his face. Agent Miller walked into the dining room. He was a tall man with a grim face. He nodded to me. Mr. Blackwood, we secured the perimeter. Vinny gave up his whole operation an hour ago. He named Richard as his primary money launderer. I stood up. My knees didn't creak. My back was straight. Good work, Miller. I looked at Jason. 2 agents were pulling him out of the chair. Dad, Jason screamed. Dad, tell them I didn't know. I walked over to him. I looked him in the eye. You knew, Jason. You forged the signature. You stripped the car. You planned to put me in a home. You knew. I didn't. I was scared. Fear is not an excuse for treason, son. They dragged him away. He was crying like a child, but he wasn't a child. He was a man who had made a choice. Vanessa was fighting, kicking at the agents, screaming obscenities. She looked at me with pure hatred. "I hope you die alone, you miserable old bastard," she shrieked. I looked at her calmly. "I might die alone, Vanessa, but I will die free, and I will die with my dignity, which is more than you will have in federal prison." They took her out. The house was suddenly quiet again, filled only with the agents cataloging evidence. Agent Miller looked at the spilled wine on the table. "Sorry about the mess, Gideon." "It is fine," I said. "It was a cheap tablecloth." I walked to the window. I watched the flashing lights outside. I saw my neighbors coming out onto their porches watching the spectacle. I saw Richard Sterling being shoved into the back of a squad car. His linen suit ruined his fake Rolex, glinting under the streetlights. I saw my son in the back of another car, his head bowed in defeat. I felt a pang of sadness, a deep ache in my chest. But it wasn't regret. It was the feeling of cutting off a gangrenous limb. It hurts, but it saves the body. I turned away from the window. I walked back to the table. I picked up the Mont Blanc pen Richard had dropped. I broke it in half. Inside was a cheap plastic refill cartridge. Fake, just like them. I threw it in the trash. I was done being a victim. Tomorrow I would sell the house. I would buy the RV. I would see the Grand Canyon. But tonight I was going to finish my whiskey, and I was going to sleep like a baby. The morning sun sliced through the blinds of O'Malley's law office, creating bars of light and shadow across the mahogany conference table. It felt less like a place of business and more like a courtroom where the verdict had already been decided, but the defendants didn't know it yet. The air conditioner hummed a low, monotonous drone that did little to dry the sweat beading on my son's forehead. I sat in a high-backed leather chair playing with the handle of my cane. I didn't need the cane. I had bought it at a pharmacy on the way over just to add a touch of frailty to my performance. It was a prop just like this meeting was a prop, just like the deed of trust sitting in the center of the table was a prop. O'Malley sat at the head of the table. He was a stone-faced man with eyes that had seen everything from racketeering indictments to messy divorces. He looked at me over the rim of his glasses, giving me a microscopic nod. The stage was set. Richard Sterling was pacing. He was wearing a fresh suit today, a charcoal gray number that looked impressive from a distance, but up close the fabric was too shiny, too synthetic. He kept checking his watch, that damnable fake Rolex, tapping the crystal, as if he could speed up time by force of will. "We need to wrap this up, gentlemen," Richard said, his voice tight. "I have a flight to Zurich this afternoon. Banking matters. Very sensitive." It was a lie. There was no flight. His passport had been flagged by the State Department 3 hours ago, thanks to the file I sent over. If he tried to board a plane, he would be tackled by TSA, but he didn't know that yet. He still thought he was the smartest man in the room. Vanessa sat next to Jason. She was vibrating with greed. She had her phone on the table face up, probably tracking the wire transfer status, waiting for the moment my life savings hit their account. She reached out and placed a hand on mine. Her skin was cold. "You are doing the right thing, Gideon," she said, her voice dripping with that sickening faux sympathy. "You will be so much happier in the facility. They have a garden. And bingo nights. You love bingo, right? I hate bingo. I hate games of chance. I prefer chess where every move is calculated and luck is a myth for the unprepared." I suppose so," I stammered, letting my hand tremble beneath hers. Is it nice, the home?" "It is lovely." Jason choked out. He sounded like he was being strangled. I looked at my son. He was the only one in the room who understood the gravity of what was happening, even if he didn't know the full extent. He knew he was betraying me. He knew he was signing his father's death warrant. His leg was bouncing under the table, a nervous staccato rhythm that shook the water pitcher. He kept loosening his tie, wiping his palms on his trousers. He looked ill, pale, sweaty. It was the physical manifestation of a conscience that hadn't quite died yet, but was in its final death throes. "Jason," I said softly. "Are you all right, son? You look warm." "I am fine, Dad," he said, not meeting my eyes. "Just let's get this signed. Please." O'Malley cleared his throat. He slid the document toward me. "This is the irrevocable transfer of deed and assets," he said, his voice neutral, professional. "By signing this, Mr. Blackwood, you are transferring ownership of your property at 42 Maple Street and all associated liquid assets to the Sterling Family Trust. You are also granting Richard Sterling full power of attorney over your remaining affairs. Do you understand?" I stared at the paper. It was the same document from last night, but formalized, printed on heavy bond paper. It looked official. It looked final. "I understand," I whispered. "Then sign it," Richard snapped, slamming his hand on the table. "Stop stalling, Gideon. The notary is waiting. The wire deadline is in 10 minutes. Sign the damn paper." He pushed a pen toward me. Not the cheap plastic one from last night. A heavy silver pen from O'Malley's desk. I picked it up. It felt cold and heavy in my hand. I looked at the signature line. Grantor Gideon Blackwood. The room went silent. I could hear Richard's breathing heavy and fast. I could hear the click of Vanessa's nails on the table. I hovered the pen over the paper. I looked at Jason one last time. I was giving him 10 seconds. 10 seconds to be a man. 10 seconds to scream stop. 10 seconds to save his soul. 1, 2, 3. He looked at me. His eyes were wet. His mouth opened slightly. 4, 5, 6. Vanessa nudged him hard with her elbow. A sharp, vicious jab to the ribs. Jason looked down. He closed his mouth. He swallowed his redemption. 7, 8, 9, 10. It was over. The verdict was in. I gripped the pen. My hand stopped shaking instantly. The tremor vanished like smoke in a strong wind. I sat up straight, my spine locking into the posture of the man I used to be. The man who had stared down cartel bosses and corrupt senators. I didn't sign. I pressed the tip of the pen into the paper so hard it tore the fiber. And I drew a line. A single violent diagonal slash from the top left corner to the bottom right. An X that covered the entire text. Then I did it again. Another slash. Crossing it out. Nullifying it. The sound of the pen tearing the paper was loud in the quiet room. Scritch! Scratch! "What are you doing?" Vanessa shrieked. Richard froze. His eyes bulged. You senile idiot. You ruined the document." I dropped the pen. It clattered onto the mahogany table, rolling toward Jason. "I am not senile, Richard," I said. My voice filled the room, deep and resonant, bouncing off the walls. "And I am not an idiot." I stood up. I didn't use the cane. I pushed the chair back and stood to my full height. I picked up the cane and laid it on the table. "I don't need this," I said. "Just like I don't need your help managing my assets." Richard looked at me confused. The transition was too fast for him. He couldn't reconcile the trembling old man from 10 seconds ago with the stone-faced statue standing before him. "Sit down, Gideon," he sputtered, trying to regain control. "You are having an episode. Jason, help your father." Jason didn't move. He was staring at me, his face white as a sheet. He recognized this voice. He remembered this posture from his childhood when he had been caught in a lie. No, Richard, I said. No more episodes. No more games. I looked at O'Malley. Counselor, please display Exhibit A. O'Malley didn't smile, but his eyes twinkled. He pressed a button on his laptop. The large flat-screen monitor on the wall hummed to life. An image appeared. It was a bank statement. High resolution. Account holder Sterling Global Holdings. Current balance $4,250,000 Status frozen by federal order. Richard turned slowly to look at the screen. The color drained from his face, leaving him looking like a wax figure melting in the heat. That is private financial data, he whispered. How did you get that? I am the auditor, Richard, I said, walking around the table toward him. I get everything. O'Malley clicked the mouse. Exhibit B. A photo appeared. Grainy black and white surveillance footage. It showed Jason standing at an ATM at 3:14 a.m., his face illuminated by the screen. He was holding my debit card. And Exhibit C. A document appeared. A loan application from Ironclad Capital, with my forged signature at the bottom. Vanessa gasped. She covered her mouth with her hand. You know, she whispered. I know everything, Vanessa, I said, turning my gaze on her. I know about the credit cards you opened in my name. I know about the fake medical records you paid Paul Hayes $50,000 to create. I know about your plan to dump me in a state ward and flee to Costa Rica. I stopped directly behind Jason's chair. I put my hands on his shoulders. He flinched as if I had burned him. And I know that my son is a coward, I said softly into his ear. A coward who would sell his father for a seat at a table with a bankrupt con man. Jason put his head on the table and began to sob. It was a pathetic sound. Richard stood up, knocking his chair over. This is entrapment, he shouted. You recorded us. You hacked my accounts. I will have your badge. I will have your pension. You don't have a lawyer, Richard, I said calmly. And you certainly don't have the leverage to threaten me. I checked my watch. The real one. It is 9 o'clock, gentlemen. The banks are open. I looked at O'Malley. Execute the order. O'Malley typed a command. On the screen, a new window popped up. A wire transfer confirmation. But it wasn't money going to Richard. It was a seizure order. Asset seizure, Federal Bureau of Investigation. Target Richard Sterling, Vanessa Blackwood, Jason Blackwood. Reason wire fraud, conspiracy to commit murder, racketeering. Conspiracy to commit murder. Vanessa screamed. We just wanted the money. Oh. Denial of medical care to a dependent senior with intent to cause death is murder in this state, Vanessa, I said. You planned to put me in a home and let me rot. You discussed how my heart condition would accelerate the payout. That is conspiracy. Richard looked at the door. He was calculating the distance. He was thinking about running. Don't bother Richard, I said. You can't outrun a radio, and you definitely can't outrun what is waiting in the lobby. I picked up the crossed-out deed of trust. I ripped it in half, then in quarters. I let the pieces flutter down onto the table like confetti at a funeral. The party is over, I said. The door to the conference room opened. It wasn't a secretary with coffee. It was Sergeant Kowalski. And behind him, 2 men in dark suits with earpieces. Mr. Blackwood, Kowalski said, nodding to me. We are ready to take custody. Richard Sterling slumped back against the wall, sliding down until he hit the floor. The great tycoon, the man who ate the weak, was reduced to a puddle of linen and regret. I looked at Jason. He hadn't moved. He was still crying, his face buried in his arms. Stand up, son, I said. He stood up slowly. He wouldn't look at me. He held his hands out for the cuffs automatically. He knew. He finally knew. I watched them being cuffed. I watched the metal click around Vanessa's wrists, silencing her protests. I watched Richard being hauled to his feet, his fake Rolex snagging on his cuff. O'Malley closed his laptop. "That went well," he said dryly. "It went exactly as calculated," I replied. I walked over to the window. I watched as they were led out to the waiting squad cars. People on the street stopped to watch. It was a spectacle. But I didn't feel triumphant. I didn't feel joy. I felt light. The weight of the lies, the weight of the pretense, it was all gone. I turned back to O'Malley. "Send the bill to the estate," I said. "Or what is left of it." "I won't charge you for this," Gideon O'Malley said. "It was educational." I nodded. I picked up my cane. I didn't need it, but I liked the weight of it in my hand. It was a weapon now, a symbol. I walked out of the office. I didn't look back at the empty chairs. I didn't look back at the torn papers. I walked out into the sunlight. It was a beautiful day, the kind of day perfect for a road trip. I had a map in my truck, and a whole country to see. And for the first time in 40 years, I didn't have to worry about who was watching the books, because I had just closed the account. I picked up the aluminum cane, the one I had leaned on so heavily just minutes before. I looked at it. It was a cheap prop purchased at a drugstore for $19, but it had served its purpose. It had sold the lie of my frailty better than any words could have. I tossed it onto the conference table. It slid across the polished mahogany with a harsh metallic scrape, knocking over the pitcher of water and crashing into Richard's chest. He flinched, stepping back as if I had thrown a grenade. I stood up straight, my spine uncoiled, my shoulders squared. The tremors in my hands were gone, instantly replaced by the steady calm of a marksman. The confused old man who needed help with his medication was gone. In his place stood the man who had brought down the entire Castellano crime family's financial wing in 1992. I unbuttoned my cardigan and took it off, revealing the crisp white shirt underneath. I rolled up my sleeves. "Sit down, Richard," I said. My voice was no longer reedy or thin. It was the voice that had made embezzlers weep in interrogation rooms. It was low, flat, and absolute. Richard stared at me. His mouth opened and closed like a fish on a dock. He looked at the cane on the table, then back at me. The cognitive dissonance was paralyzing him. He couldn't reconcile the victim he thought he had trapped with the predator standing before him. What is happening here?" he stammered. "Jason, what is wrong with your father?" Jason didn't answer. He was staring at the crossed-out document, his face a mask of pure terror. He knew. He remembered this version of me. He remembered the father who didn't tolerate lies. "O'Malley, turn it on," I said. The lawyer nodded. He pressed a key on his laptop. The lights in the conference room dimmed slightly as the 60-inch monitor on the wall hummed to life. "Let's look at the family album," I said, walking toward the screen. The first image appeared. It wasn't a photo of a birthday party or a holiday dinner. It was a grainy black and white surveillance still. High contrast. Time stamped 3:14 in the morning 2 weeks ago. It showed Jason sitting at a high-limit blackjack table at the Golden Nugget. His tie was undone, his eyes were wild and bloodshot. He was pushing a stack of chips forward. Next to the photo, O'Malley projected a spreadsheet. It was a forensic timeline of my son's bank account. "Exhibit A," I said, pointing to the screen. "The disintegration of a man." "Jason, you told me you were working late nights at the firm. You haven't had a job in 2 years. This is where you were." I read the lines off the screen. Withdrawal $500. Withdrawal $500. Declined. Declined. Overdraft fee. Jason put his head in his hands. A low moan escaped his lips. "You lost $40,000 in 3 months, Jason. You gambled away your severance. You gambled away your savings. And when that was gone, you started gambling with my money." Vanessa stood up. Her face was pale, but her eyes were furious. "Stop this!" she screamed. "This is an invasion of privacy. You hacked his accounts." I turned to her all. "I didn't hack anything, Vanessa. I audited him. And speaking of audits, let's look at Exhibit B." O'Malley clicked the mouse. The screen changed. This time it was a document, a bankruptcy filing from the Southern District of New York, dated 10 years ago. Debtor name Richard Sterling, status discharged, assets liquidation, and next to it a more recent document, a foreclosure notice on a penthouse in Miami. Dated last week. "Your father isn't a tycoon, Vanessa," I said, my voice cold. "He is a ghost. He has been insolvent for a decade. He has been floating checks and moving debt from one shell company to another to keep up the appearance of wealth. The Bentley outside. It is a rental, and the credit card used to rent it was declined this morning." Richard was shaking now, not a fake tremor like mine had been, but a real bone-rattling shake of terror. "This is slander," he hissed. "I have assets. I have liquidity. You have nothing." I roared, slamming my hand on the table. O'Malley clicked the mouse again. Exhibit C. The screen filled with a PDF. It was a federal document. The seal of the Department of Justice was watermark in the background. Title: United States of America versus Richard Sterling. Charge 18 U.S. Code 1943, fraud by wire, radio, or television. Status: active arrest warrant. The room went dead silent. The hum of the projector fan sounded like a jet engine. "Wire fraud, Richard Thoreau," I said, stepping closer to him. "You have been soliciting investors for a real estate development in Arizona that doesn't exist. You took deposits via email. You wired the money to an account in the Cayman Islands. That is federal jurisdiction. That is the big leagues." Richard backed away until he hit the wall. He looked at the door. He looked at the window. He was a rat in a box, and he knew it. You couldn't know that. That is sealed. That is—" "I made a phone call," I said. "To a friend at the bureau. I sent him your file 3 days ago, Richard. When Jason tried to scam me with the car accident, I knew something was wrong. I started digging. And when I dig, I hit bedrock." I looked at Jason. "You forged my signature on a mortgage application, Jason. You tried to sell my house out from under me to pay off this man's debts. You weren't saving Vanessa. You were feeding a parasite." Jason looked up. His eyes were red and swollen. "He promised me Dad. He promised he would pay it back. He said it was just a bridge loan. He said—" "He lied to you," I shouted. "He used you. He knew I had equity. He knew I had a clean title. He saw me as a piggy bank to smash open so he could buy himself another month of freedom." Vanessa tried to grab the laptop. She lunged across the table, her fingernails clawing at the keyboard, trying to kill the image on the screen. "Turn it off!" she shrieked. "Stop it!" O'Malley caught her wrist. He didn't look like a lawyer anymore. He looked like a bouncer. "Sit down, Mrs. Blackwood," he said calmly, "or I will add assault to the list of charges." She fell back into her chair, sobbing. Not tears of remorse. Tears of a spoiled child who had been told no for the first time in her life. Richard was panting. He pulled at his collar. "Listen, Gideon," he said, his voice cracking. "We can make a deal. I have contacts. I can get money. I can pay you. Just don't call them. Don't make this official. It is already official, Richard." I pointed to the door. "I didn't call the local police. They handle traffic tickets and domestic disputes. This isn't a dispute. This is a federal crime." The heavy oak door to the office didn't open. It burst inward. It wasn't a gentle entrance. It was a kinetic breach. 6 men in windbreakers with yellow lettering poured into the room. They moved with the fluid aggression of professionals. Weapons were drawn, but pointed low. FBI federal agents. Don't move, hands on the table. Now, Richard screamed. It was a high-pitched sound, undignified and raw. He threw his hands up, dropping the fake Mont Blanc pen. Jason slid out of his chair and onto the floor, curling into a ball, his hands over his head. He was weeping openly now, a broken man. Vanessa just stared, mouth open, as a female agent moved toward her, pulling a pair of zip ties from her belt. Agent Miller walked into the room. He was the lead agent, the man I had spoken to on the burner phone. He looked at the scene, the shattered illusion of a family. And then he looked at me. He nodded. Secure them, he ordered his team. They grabbed Richard first. They spun him around and slammed him against the wall. The sound of handcuffs ratcheting shut was loud and final. Click, click, click. You can't do this, Richard yelled, his face pressed against the drywall. Do you know who I am? I am Richard Sterling. We know exactly who you are, Miller said coolly. You are inmate number 49211. They pulled Jason up from the floor. He didn't fight. He was limp, dead weight. He looked at me as they cuffed him. Dad, please. I didn't look away. I didn't flinch. You made your choice, Jason, I said. My voice steady, though my heart was breaking. You chose him, you chose the lie. They cuffed Vanessa last. She was screaming, spitting, cursing me, cursing Jason, cursing the world. This is your fault, she yelled at me. You old miser, you have millions. Why didn't you just give it to us? Why did you have to ruin everything? Because I earned it, Vanessa, I said. And you tried to steal it. That is the difference. Agent Miller walked over to me. He stood next to Richard, who was being hauled toward the door. Richard looked at me. His eyes were wide with a new kind of realization. He looked at the way the agents deferred to me. He looked at the way Miller stood next to me, not as a protector, but as a peer. Who are you? He whispered. You are just a retired accountant. Miller laughed, a short bark of a laugh. Just an accountant, Miller said, shaking his head. Mr. Sterling, you didn't do your homework. Gideon Blackwood isn't just an accountant. He is the legend. He wrote the manual on forensic auditing. He is the reason half the mobsters in Chicago are currently making license plates. Richard's jaw dropped. The blood drained from his face, leaving him looking gray and old. You were the auditor. I leaned in close. That's right, Richard. And I just finished my last audit. You came up short. Take him away, Miller. The agents marched them out. Richard stumbling his fake Rolex, catching the light one last time. Jason weeping, his head hung low. Vanessa screaming until the elevator doors cut off her voice. The room was suddenly quiet. The projector hummed. The image of the arrest warrant still glowed on the screen. O'Malley took off his glasses and rubbed his eyes. Jesus, Gideon, he said softly. That was intense. It was necessary, I said. I walked to the window. I looked down at the street below. I saw the black SUVs. I saw my son being pushed into the back of one. I saw the life I thought I had built driving away in handcuffs. I felt a deep, hollow ache in my chest. It wasn't victory. It was surgery. I had cut out the cancer, but I was still bleeding. But then I looked at my reflection in the glass. I stood tall. I wasn't the shaking old man anymore. I wasn't the victim. I turned back to the table. I picked up the crossed-out deed of trust. I ripped it in half, then in quarters. I dropped the pieces into the wastebasket. Send me the bill, O'Malley, I said. There is no bill, O'Malley said, closing his laptop. That was on the house. Seeing Richard Sterling's face when he realized who you were, that was payment enough. I nodded. I picked up my cane again. I didn't lean on it. I held it like a weapon. I am going to sell the house, I said. Really? O'Malley asked. Yes. Too many ghosts. I am going to buy an RV, a big one. I am going to see the Grand Canyon. And Jason. I paused at the door. Jason has a public defender. He has 5 years to think about what he did. Maybe when he gets out, he will be the man I tried to raise. But until then, he is on his own. I walked out of the office. I walked into the lobby and out the front doors. The sun was blindingly bright. The city noise washed over me. I took a deep breath. The air smelled of exhaust and coffee and freedom. I was 72 years old. I had no house, I had no family. But I had my dignity. And I had a full tank of gas. It was a good day to start over. The wheels of federal justice usually grind slow, but when the evidence is gift-wrapped by a forensic accountant with 30 years of bureau experience, they grind with the terrifying speed of an industrial shredder. It took exactly 3 months to close the file on the Blackwood and Sterling conspiracy. I attended the sentencing hearing, not because I wanted to see them suffer, but because an auditor always stays until the final numbers are tallied. Richard Sterling tried to represent himself. It was a final act of narcissism from a man who believed he could talk his way out of gravity. He spent 3 days lecturing the judge about high finance and the nature of leverage. The judge, a stern woman who had zero patience for white-collar predators, sentenced him to 20 years in a maximum security federal penitentiary. No parole. Sterling collapsed when the gavel fell weeping into his hands like a child who had dropped his ice cream cone. Vanessa received 3 years. Her lawyer tried to paint her as a victim of coercive control, a dutiful wife following orders. But the credit card records I provided showed she was the one buying the plane tickets to Costa Rica, and the text messages I recovered from her phone showed she was the architect of the plan to declare me incompetent. 3 years for wire fraud and elder abuse. She didn't look at me as they led her away. She just stared at the floor, her face a mask of ruined ambition. And Jason, my son. He received 5 years. The sentence was heavier than Vanessa's because he was the one who physically forged the signature. He was the one who betrayed the fiduciary duty of a child to a parent. When the sentence was read, he looked back at the gallery. He looked right at me. I think he expected me to stand up to object to save him one last time. I stayed seated. I kept my face blank. I had saved him enough. 5 years was a mercy compared to the lifetime of guilt he was going to carry. The next day, I sold the house. I didn't hire a staging company. I didn't bake cookies to make it smell like home. I called a We Buy Ugly Houses investor I knew from my old days chasing asset forfeitures. He came over at 9 in the morning. He walked through the rooms kicking the baseboards, checking the foundation. He offered me $600,000 cash, as is. 2-week close. It was below market value. A realtor would have told me to hold out for $800. But I didn't care about the extra $200,000. I was paying for speed. I was paying for severance. Done, I said, shaking his hand. I spent the next week purging 40 years of accumulation. It is strange how little of a life is actually essential when you strip it down. I hired an estate sale company to handle the furniture. The mahogany dining table where I had recorded their confession went for $2,000. The leather armchair where I had waited for Richard went for $500. I walked through the empty rooms on the final day. The house echoed. It smelled of dust and emptiness. I looked into Jason's old room. The walls were still painted the blue he had chosen when he was 12. I looked at the kitchen where we had eaten thousands of breakfasts. I waited for the nostalgia to hit me. I waited for the tears. They didn't come. All I felt was the relief of a man who has finally put down a heavy load he had been carrying for too long. This wasn't a home anymore. It was just a structure of wood and drywall where a crime had occurred. I packed a single box, the photo of my wife, my badge, my service awards, a few clothes, and my laptop. I walked out the front door and locked it. I dropped the key into the lockbox for the new owner. I didn't look back. I didn't wave goodbye. I walked down the driveway to my truck where the engine was already running. The rearview mirror framed the house perfectly as I drove away. I watched it shrink until it was just a white speck in the distance, and then I turned a corner and it was gone. I didn't feel like I was losing a past. I felt like I was gaining a future. The ledger was closed, the balance was zero, and the road ahead was wide open. The desert air in Arizona is different. It is clean, dry, and honest. It burns the lungs in a good way. I was driving a 40-foot Class A motorhome, a beast of chrome and steel that cost more than my first 3 houses combined. I paid cash. The engine hummed a low, steady vibration that felt like a second heartbeat beneath the floorboards. I watched the red rocks of Sedona pass by in the panoramic windshield. For the first time in my life, I wasn't chasing a paper trail. I was just chasing the horizon. I pulled into a dispersed camping site near the north rim of the Grand Canyon. The silence was absolute, broken only by the wind moving through the pinyon pines. I set up camp. I made a fire. The dry mesquite wood caught quickly, snapping and popping in the twilight, sending orange sparks drifting up toward the first stars. I opened the packet of mail my forwarding service had sent to the general delivery at the local post office. Most of it was junk. But at the bottom of the stack was a plain white envelope. The return address was stamped in red ink, Federal Correctional Institution, Danbury. Jason. I held the letter in my hand. It felt light, insubstantial. I wondered what was inside. An apology. A plea for commissary money. A renewed attempt to gaslight me into guilt. Or maybe just another lie constructed by a man who had forgotten how to tell the truth. I looked at the fire. The flames were hungry, dancing yellow and blue. I didn't open the letter. I didn't need to audit his regret. The statute of limitations on my fatherhood had expired the moment he forged my name. I tossed the unopened envelope into the center of the fire. I watched the paper curl and blacken. I watched the ink of my son's name turn to ash and float up into the vast, uncaring sky. The case was closed. The file was archived. The next morning I was drinking coffee outside when I saw them. An older couple in a vintage Airstream 2 sites down. They were sitting at a weathered picnic table, arguing over a stack of papers. The husband looked confused, rubbing his temples as if he had a migraine. The wife looked scared. I recognized the look. It was the look of prey that hears a twig snap in the dark. It was the look of someone who is drowning in fine print. I walked over. I didn't need a badge anymore. I didn't need a warrant. I just needed my eyes. "Excuse me," I said, my voice carrying across the quiet campground. I couldn't help but notice. That looks like a reverse mortgage application. The man looked up, surprised. "It is," he said, his voice shaky. "But the fees, we don't understand them. The broker said it was standard. He said we had to sign today to lock in the rate." I sat down at their picnic table uninvited, but welcome. I pulled a pen from my pocket. "Let me take a look," I said. "I used to be an auditor." I scanned the document. It took me 10 seconds to spot the trap. Hidden origination fees, equity stripping clauses, balloon payments designed to force foreclosure. It was a scam wrapped in legal stationery, a financial landmine. "Do not sign this," I told them, looking the man in the eye. "This is fraud, and I can prove it." The relief on their faces was immediate, visceral. It was better than any paycheck I had ever received. I spent the next hour showing them the red flags, showing them how to protect themselves, teaching them how to spot the wolf in the suit. As I walked back to my RV, I realized something. I hadn't retired. I had just gone freelance. There were wolves everywhere. There were always going to be men like Richard Sterling and Jason. But as long as I had gas in the tank and a pen in my pocket, I was going to be the sheepdog. My name is Gideon Blackwood, and I am still watching the books. We are often told that family is sacred, that we should sacrifice everything for our children. But I learned the hard way that blind loyalty is not a virtue, it is a vulnerability. True love requires respect, and sometimes the most loving thing you can do is hold people accountable for their actions. You cannot save someone who is determined to drown you just to keep themselves afloat. Protecting your dignity and your future isn't selfishness, it is survival. It is never too late to draw a line in the sand, even if the person standing on the other side shares your blood. If you have ever had to make a heartbreaking decision to protect yourself from a toxic family member, I want to hear your story in the comments below. Please like this video and subscribe to the channel for more stories where the truth finally wins.